Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the ARIANA Resources PLC investor presentation. Throughout this presentation, investors will be in listen-only mode. Questions are encouraged and can be submitted at any time via the Q&A tab situated on the right-hand corner of your screen. Simply click Q&A, type in your question, and press send. The company may not be in a position to answer every question it receives during the meeting itself. However, the company will review all questions submitted today and publish responses where it's appropriate to do so. These will be available via Investor Meet Company dashboard and will be notified once these are ready for your review. I'd also like to remind you that this presentation is being recorded. Before we begin, we'd like to submit the following poll. I'd now like to hand you over to Michael de Villiers, Chairman, and Dr. Karim Senna, CEO of ARIANA Resources PLC. Good morning.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our December 2020 Q&A. ARIANA Resources is very pleased to announce this morning our announcement of our special dividend, which I'm sure you'd like to know some more about, and we'll be able to answer those questions during the course of the other questions that have been submitted. We'll also have a short presentation, and I'll now hand over to our Managing Director, Dr. Karim Senna, to continue with the Q&A and presentation.
Thank you for the introduction, Michael, and welcome to everyone that's been able to join this investor webinar. It's great to see so many people in attendance. I'd like to take this opportunity to run investors and shareholders through the corporate presentation. Now, this is very much a whittled down version of a presentation that we're working towards, and ultimately we'll have that presentation. We run through that presentation during the course of our AGM. This one relies largely on some of the graphics that we introduced in the annual report and accounts published last week. And I will run through those and provide further explanation concerning some of those graphical elements. I'll start off with just an introduction here on the first slide, because I think it's quite relevant. This is actually a drone photograph taken from survey altitude when we were undertaking a photogrammetric survey over the top of the Sullenbush project. And those coordinates shown there are actually the central coordinates of the Ardler copper-gold porphyry system. Just providing an update on the company and where we find ourselves today following the completion of our groundbreaking deal with Erzalten Holdings and Presea Construction. As you know, we've introduced Erzalten Holdings as a third joint venture partner within the Zenith Madencilik JV in Turkey, and also integrated the Sullenbush project into the Zenith JV framework. So the Zenith JV now comprises three primary projects: Kızıltepe, our operating gold and silver mine; Tavşan, which will be the next mine, gold mine, and the Sullenbush development project. In addition, there are a number of smaller satellite projects that we also sold into the joint venture, and we've just completed that recently. So the joint venture is significantly expanded. The capabilities of that joint venture have expanded, and we're continuing to develop the Kızıltepe mine, and I'll run through that in a little bit more detail later, and advance the Tavşan project to production, with further work underway at the Sullenbush project. So over the last 15 years as a company, we listed on AIM in 2005, so a little over 15 years. We've demonstrated a very good track record. We've pretty much hit all of our targets through that period of time. We've demonstrated that through the joint venture, we have a profitable enterprise that is sustainable, which is leading to further production growth. All of this I will detail further in the presentation. We now have, by virtue of our partial divestment of interests in the joint venture in Turkey, a significant cash position. And it's in relation to that significant cash position we have the ability now to pay a special dividend to our loyal shareholders. Importantly, the joint venture now has minimal debt. I will talk about the debt component of the operations and in particular the development of the Kızıltepe mine a little bit further on. But essentially that debt is now at minimal levels. And we're also demonstrating very significant growth targets for the joint venture, which ultimately will lead to the ability for the Zenith JV to continue paying a dividend up to the owning company, Galata Madencilik, and onward to the group company. So in summary, our operations in Turkey have been substantially enhanced with the expansion of our operational joint venture. It's now encompassing multi-million ounce gold project in the form of the Solunbaş gold-silver system and its associated copper-gold porphyry at Ardalı. We are also starting our expansion into other regional jurisdictions. So a very quick snapshot of some of the key fundamentals. The thing that I'd like investors to take away from this is that this share price and volume graph that you can see down here in the lower right-hand corner, I've taken this from midway through 2016, midway through 2017, which was the start of commercial production from the Kızıltepe gold and silver mine. So showing substantial share price appreciation within that period of time. Importantly, as a result of that, our market capitalization has continued to grow, and we're now over 50 million pounds, which was a target that I sort of set myself internally to achieving several years ago, and we're now at that point in time. We expect from further developments into the next 10 years, and I'll touch on aspects of this into the presentation, we'll expect to continue to grow this market capitalization going forward. Now, the focus area for the company is obviously Turkey, our joint venture operations in Turkey shown in that lower map, split between Kızıltepe, Tavşan and Solunbaş, those orange points. Are earning to 50% of Venous Minerals in Cyprus, that turquoise point, and also are earning to 75% of Western Tethyan Resources based in Kosovo, but encompassing mineral exploration activities across Eastern Europe. So we're expanding our profile as a company across that part of the Tethyan metallogenic belt, which itself extends all the way from Eastern Europe and past the Himalayas out into the Indonesian arc. And that's shown in the larger map as that sort of pinkish coloured area. Our operations are primarily run out of our Ankara office. We have a substantial operating team there, and we're continuing to augment that. In addition, we've got our joint venture team based out at site in Kızıltepe, and we have about 180 staff members on site at the present time. Now, the company can be summarized through this graphic. At the very top, that represents our producing asset or our most advanced assets contained within the Zenith joint venture, of which we retained 23.5% following our partial divestment to Asgard Holdings earlier this year. That entity, as I've explained previously, comprises the operating asset plus the advanced projects such as Tavşan and Solunbaş. So it essentially represents the lowest risk part of the portfolio, and it also represents cash flow to the business. A tier under that, we have our earn into Venous Minerals, earning into 50%, but we're currently at 37.5%. And also our earn into Western Tethyan Resources in Eastern Europe, earning into 75% currently. A tier below that is the newly established Asgard Metals Fund, and this really develops our project catalytic strategy, which is to look at early stage, discovery stage essentially, projects potentially anywhere in the Eastern Hemisphere, as outlined in the map that I showed previously. And we're looking at exploration hotspots, particularly for gold, but other minerals too. And some of those other minerals that we're interested in include copper or any other metal that is associated with a transition to green energy technologies, which are going to be so important in the coming decades. Asgard Metals Fund essentially developed out of Asgard Metals Pty Limited, which was an Australian subsidiary that we established some years ago, with initial interests in lithium exploration in the Northern Territory and Western Australia. We did very well out of those investments and turned effectively a $35,000 investment by the company into $3.5 million within fairly short order, within a couple of years. And it's on the back of that financial success that has given us the platform for the development of the Asgard Metals Fund. So we're looking out for key opportunities really across the Eastern Hemisphere, and we'd intend to get invested in a number of junior exploration companies through that. As part of this, and in a sense, at one tier below that, we have our project generation division. So this is really the brains behind the project catalytic approach. It's our ability to identify high quality projects that we can then feed into this exploration pipeline and progressively de-risk projects and get them to approach the apex there. Now, we've had prior success, as indicated, in similar investments that we've undertaken over the years. Not a huge amount of emphasis was ever placed on these back in the day because investors were far more interested in what we were doing at Kızıltepe. But really, this has always been part of the ARIANA strategy, and it's a core component of what we do going forward. Now, one thing that is really worth highlighting is that we set ourselves apart quite substantially from any other junior exploration company. There are very few companies that can point to the metrics that we're able to as a business. And whether we're looking at operational metrics, such as the carbon dioxide footprint of our joint venture operations, they are well below the international average. Or it's looking at the discovery costs. And this is something that we really pride ourselves in as a business. It's actually essential and core to what we do, and that is minimizing the exploration costs. So what does it cost our shareholders for us as a team to identify 1 ounce of gold? It's a very simple metric. Most exploration companies will not give you that because the number is usually fairly appalling. And the international average is $62 per ounce. We're coming in at $12 an ounce. The industry, the gold exploration industry, has not seen that sort of level of discovery costs since the mid-1980s, yet we're maintaining our discovery cost at mid-1980s levels. Another important point on the operational side of the business are the cash costs of producing an ounce of gold. And they're coming in at about $490 per ounce, based on all prior quarters of production since early 2017 from the Kızıltepe operation. The international average currently is about $1,000 per ounce. So again, we beat our competitors by quite some margin. Now, how are we able to do this as a business? Well, one is very good operating practice, being very tight with the purse strings, something that we pride ourselves on. But it's also critically our ability to utilize the very latest technologies as a business, and to do this with a very sound operational and strategic framework. And some of the photographs shown around that slide highlight some of the technologies that we have in use at this point in time. So up there in the top right-hand side, there is our exploration manager, Berkin Urlu. He's utilizing a portable XRF unit. What this instrument does is provide instantaneous geochemical readout. So you're not just relying on the geologist to provide an assessment of what the mineral component of a rock or a piece of drill core is showing. And that can be a subjective affair for most exploration geologists. But it's giving a very precise geochemical readout of a particular point on the sample. And this is an invaluable tool for all manner of work that we undertake. And one of the things that it's very good at is it minimizes the amount of material that's being sent off to the laboratory for geochemical analysis, which of course itself is much costlier. So we're only sending that material that we know is actually mineralized rather than sending, let's say, all the core. Related to this is an instrument that we've recently started making use of on site, and that's a box scan unit produced by Geotech. And we're a luminary customer for box scan and Geotech. It's the very first time that this sort of instrumentation is being utilized in this manner. In the junior exploration space, we're one of just a handful of companies that have this equipment worldwide. And although it's not so clear from that photograph, that instrument includes an XRF unit itself, a magnetic susceptibility meter, a alteration survey device, and a very high resolution camera, and also digital scanner effectively to bring all the core into for three-dimensional assessment digitally. And this again provides reams of additional data that is not possible for a single geologist or even a geological team to assess in their own right. And this business is all about collecting as much data as you can and to utilize that data in the most effective means possible. Another example of this is shown in the left-hand photograph. We are implementing all of our logging now directly online into the database. So there's no hard copy paper trail, so to speak. Everything is directly integrated into our digital database system. So it minimizes the possibilities of error. So what does that all boil down to? Well, in summary, this diagram goes a long way to explaining how we've achieved this and the timeline of having achieved it. So in summary, we can show the growth of the company from IPO back in 2005 all the way up to present, 2020. Those circles represent the growth in market capitalization of the company, which is the key measure. And also we provide the details of the resource growth as well. So we've grown from a resource of 0 when we started off as an exploration company, progressively grew the resource base, and consequently the market capitalization of the company continued to grow. But quite significantly, you can see that there's a marked change from 2017 to 2020. This coincided with the end of shareholder funding effectively through the market. To date, we have utilized about $25 million of shareholder funds. And at that moment in time, in early 2017, marked the beginning of production from Kızıltepe. Associated with the development of Kızıltepe was a substantial amount of debt, an initial $33 million to build and develop the mine, but further working capital as well has been paid off. And now there's a smaller loan that we're paying off in association with the processing plant expansion that's due to be completed very soon. So that debt component amounts to, let's say, about $50 million. And a large part of that, as I said, is essentially paid off now. So you can see that is one very clear reason for why there's been such a marked growth in market capitalization in that window of time between 2017 and 2020. Another thing that we've done over the years is that we've brought on board very sound joint venture partners to the business in the form of Procia back in 2010. With Procia, we successfully developed the Kızıltepe mine. We've now brought on board, of course, Özal it's important to recognize the past contribution of European Goldfields and Eldorado Gold in getting the Sullenbusch project to this point in time. And they contributed about $8.4 million. So in summary, about $25 million was utilized through shareholder funds to develop the business, but overall, $100 million is the total expenditure, so to speak, of the company and its joint venture enterprises to date. So perhaps it's no surprise that ARIANA is about a quarter of the joint venture in Turkey now, shareholder funds having only represented about a quarter of the total. However, that's omitting the fact that we've successfully divested part of our interest in Turkey. So we're now also sitting on a very substantial pile of cash. So it puts, that slide essentially puts everything into context and brings us up to the present day, and really underscores our ability to start paying dividends to shareholders, initially through the special dividend that we announced earlier this morning. So very briefly, I'll go through the Zenith joint venture and what we're working on currently. And I think one of the key graphics that we included in the annual report is this one. Now I'll draw your attention to the Kızıltepe deposit. It's shown in orange, and I should also point out that those squiggly shapes there are the actual aerial footprints of each of our deposits across the joint venture. We also show the Magellan project in Cyprus there as well for context. So Kızıltepe is a relatively small deposit containing 227,000 ounces of gold, but it is the operating mine from which we derive the revenue. In comparison to the other assets, Kızıltepe is right down there at the small end of the equation. Our key assets going forward for the joint venture are clearly going to be Tavşan, which will be the next operating mine, and also the Sullenbusch and Ardalı system. So I think this slide speaks volumes in terms of showing the future growth path of the joint venture, at least. In terms of the operational performance of the joint venture to date, so looking at that revenue figure from the previous slide, I mean, that can be broken down in the format of that graphic there in the top left. That shows silver ounces shown in grey relative to gold ounces shown in gold. And really, I think this highlights the fact that Kızıltepe is really a silver mine in terms of volume of metal produced. But obviously in terms of value, clearly the value is associated with the gold. So that's $134 million of revenue to date, at least till the end of 2020, can be broken down in the form shown in that graphic. And we've also provided a prediction, or estimate rather, for where we expect 2021 production to be. It's important to point out that we've been mining at a far higher rate than the feasibility had planned for. There are very good reasons for this. And that million odd tons that has been mined to date, not all of that's been processed, perhaps about 3/4 of that has been processed to date. So we've got a very large stockpile, currently approximating about 10 months of mill throughput. The mill throughput itself to date, we've been averaging about 3.52 grams per ton of gold since operations commenced. But we are in the process of expanding our mill throughput, and we'll provide an update on that in due course, and we're expecting fairly shortly. The effect of the mill expansion is shown in the graphic on the bottom right-hand side. So you can see the mill expansion being complete during the course of this year, 2021. And then as a result of that enhanced mill throughput, going from about 200,000 tons of ore per annum to 400,000 tons of ore per annum, we're expecting a ramp up in output from the Kızıltepe operation. That graphic also shows when we're currently expecting the Tavşan operation to commence production, and then we run the Taoyuan production right to the end of its mine life in 2030 there. We also show our expectation of operations commencing at Sullenbush as well, but obviously this is all subject to feasibility and permitting. So moving on to Venous Minerals, we are earning into 50% of Venous Minerals, currently at 37.5%. The license areas are spread largely across the North Troodos area, and our key focus is the Magellan project area, shown in purple on that map, and as well as an important exploration project called Mariner, further to the east. At Magellan, we've identified JORC inferred resources at 9.5 million tonnes at 0.65% copper, but this resource also contains substantial zinc in part, about 0.6%, as well as gold and silver. The question of gold is something that we've been asking ourselves since we began operations through the Venous Minerals earn-in. It's absolutely key to determining and deriving value from the Cyprus-type volcanogenic massive sulfide copper-gold systems. And from the latest drilling data we announced a couple of weeks ago, we've proven that gold exists in substantial quantities, certainly at the Coquinoya sector of the Magellan project, and those drilling results there demonstrate that. Western Tethyan resources, this is focused again on copper-gold exploration, but this time in Eastern Europe, where we're earning into 75%. Now this summary map shows the focus area outlined in orange here. We have our base of operations in Pristina, Kosovo. We've got an excellent exploration team associated with Western Tethyan resources run by Mentor Demi, an accomplished geoscientist with a number of successes through this region, particularly in Armenia. Although it's Kosovan-based, we're focused on exploration throughout that region, and we're evaluating a number of projects in that overall area. We've got license applications in. We're waiting for those to be granted. We're expecting to make further license applications in due course, whether they be in Kosovo or one of the other countries in that region. But we're looking forward to continuing to support Western Tethyan resources in their exploration activities. And that brings me to the end of the presentation. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Dr. Karim. Ladies and gentlemen, do please continue to submit your questions using the Q&A tab situated on the right-hand corner of your screen. Just simply click Q&A, type in your question and press send. But just while the team take a few moments to review those investor questions submitted, I'd like to remind you that recording this presentation, along with a copy of the slides and the published Q&A, can be accessed via your Investor Meet Company dashboard on the platform. I'd also like to remind you that your feedback is important to the company, and immediately after the presentation has ended, you'll be redirected for the opportunity to provide your feedback in order that the company can better understand your views and expectations. Michael, Karim, we obviously received a number of pre-submitted questions from investors, and you've kindly provided responses to those, and they will be published on the Investor Meet Company platform along with the responses to any questions from the live session as well. And we've received several questions already from investors. So perhaps if I could just hand back to you to click on that Q&A tab, and where appropriate to do so, read out the question, just give your verbal response. That'd be great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, perhaps before I delve into the questions, I'll just reiterate the previous submitted questions we have provided answers for, which can be reviewed. If there are any further questions that result from those initial answers that we provided as a company, we can also touch on those shortly. Now moving on to the questions that have just come in as we were speaking. A couple of questions there from Andy M that are similar, relating to future growth and whether today's dividend announcement puts any limits to our growth options. So by this, I'm assuming that the inference there is that by paying out a substantial portion of available cash, we're limiting the growth options of the company. We don't see it that way at all. It's important to remember that ARIANA operated largely off the smell of an oily rag for 15 plus years. And we had a very much hand-to-mouth existence, pretty much every year coming back to the market for further investors' funds in order to fund the development of the company. Now, we closed that chapter on our history in 2017 when we went into successful operations at Kızıltepe. But we know what we're capable of as a company, and we know how to run this ship in a very lean fashion and to do it very, very effectively. Now, yes, we're in the very fortunate position of sitting on a substantial cash pile as a result of the divestment of interests in the joint venture in Turkey and our other interests in Turkey. But we feel this is an opportune moment after the best part of 2 decades to provide a distinct return to shareholders that effectively draws a line under the past and enables us to move on as a business. And we're still retaining a substantial amount of capital to be able to do a hell of a lot of work.
Kerem, should we perhaps whistle through the Qs 1 to 14 that we got in?
Sure. Yeah. Happy to do that. Do you want to start, Michael?
Well, yes. Let's do them alternately. Question 1: are we considering a consolidation? This is under review. Share consolidation, that is. It's not something we've debated at great length, so we're considering it, and I think we won't dwell on that any longer.
Sorry, Michael, I'm just trying to find my what I've done with my answers here.
Well, I'll go on to question 2. Are we considering any share buybacks? We've primarily focused this on being something available for staff and people who are very close to the company as part of our team who receive shares as part payment. And that's really all the share purchases are considered for. We're not going wholesale into the market buying shares, and nothing more really to be said on that one. There's a detailed answer going to be published.
You can keep going, Michael. Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah.
The question on public relations. Well, we've actually considered ourselves to be amongst those as up to date as we can be with publishing price sensitive information as it becomes available. We're continuing to do so. When it comes to the point of promotion, obviously we're not able to attend conferences as we have in the past. That I think will come back in the future. I know it was Freedom Day yesterday, but I don't think it feels like it. And it's probably another year before we have face-to-face opportunities to meet shareholders and other interested parties at conferences and share promotion events. But we'll probably be doing more of these sort of investor seminars type approaches using Investor Meet Company because it does work rather well with us being in different places and not able to meet face to face. And I think our shareholders must appreciate that we have actually been publishing everything that has come due for publishing as and when it has been available, as we've done now. And I think the deluge of news we've put out in the last 3 weeks is testament to that.
Yeah, I think it's also worth adding there, Michael, that one of the things that we pride ourselves on as a business is the quality of the RNS releases. Investors can rely on our RNSs, particularly the technical ones, in providing a huge amount of detail. We're not averse to providing that detail, and a lot of information can be gleaned through a very careful read through of our RNS releases. So from a PR perspective, if related to RNSs, I think we're ticking all the boxes, and I don't think that we're underdoing our RNSs in any way.
And the history stands. It's the detail is there for people to go back and have a look on our website. And I think the current annual report has a huge amount of new information in it that is there for the reading.
Exactly. I have now found the answers, so I can continue if you like, Michael.
Okay.
So question 4 was a longer one, just relating to certain content within the annual report, and whether the goals we stated, or rather the strategies, a strategic approach, is realistic. Very much so. It's absolutely essential that we followed those strategic elements essentially to the letter over the years, and they're certainly not, as was put, motherhood statements. They're absolutely core to our business strategy. There's also reference there to, why is it that the annual report is not more aspirational? Well, I don't think it's the place for aspirational statements so much in an annual report. An annual report is there to record a period of time, and that the information provided for that period of time that represents that period is auditable and verifiable. Aspirational statements, yes, there are a few related to the outlook section of the operations review and certain aspects of the chairman's statement, but the annual report's not really the place for that. And other platforms, and these sorts of Q&A are a good example of that, but proactive or other interviews are another place.
I would agree with all that, Kieran.
Okay, thank you. The next question, 5, is in relation to the environmental impact assessment application for Taushan, and whether there are delays and the nature of those delays. Well, we previously referred to this in some prior proactive BRR media interviews, that we are experiencing delays as a result of COVID. Now, the Turkish government, a number of government departments effectively shut down during the course of last year. This has led to a backlog. Things are still not running exactly as normal. There are still issues. And it's very difficult for us to get a handle on government timelines. And it's not really our place to second guess what the government is doing all the time. Our application is in. We're waiting for a response. And as soon as we've got a response, we'll provide an update to the market. And Taushan is one example of that. I mean, there are other permit-related applications that we have in for our other projects that have been similarly impacted. And when we receive a permit that is material to the business, of course, we will announce that as appropriate. I think question 6 is also to some degree impacted by what we've experienced over this last year and a half. So permitting aspects associated with Salonbash, that we've experienced some delays in that as well. But from an environmental impact assessment point of view, we'd commenced an environmental scoping study on the project prior to completing our transaction with Özaltın, and this lays the foundations for the formal EIA work, and that's underway. Aspects of that are underway, because you need a substantial timeline in which to lay down the foundations of an EIA to assess the local environment from a pre-mining perspective. We're also working continuously on social and community aspects as well. I mean, it's an integral part of how we run our business. It's very important to ensure that we've got community buy-in.
It's worth pointing out that we achieved that with great success and probably record success in Turkey. In fact, in all of my 15 years of being involved in this industry on project levels, I've never seen quite so many straightforward public meetings.
Yes, that's right. We've had a pretty good run of public meetings in the past, so long may that continue. Question 7, relating to an independent non-executive director, an additional one. There is reference to this in the annual report. Depending on the strategic aspects and exactly what an individual would add to the business relative to the strategy, that's something that obviously we would continue to give consideration to. But at this point in time, the board makeup is entirely adequate for our current objectives. Question 8, this relates to what's happening with the weakening Turkish lira. There's a view there that represents a substantial loss to the business. Well, obviously, we don't control exchange rate movements, and what we do to mitigate the risk of exposure to Turkish lira is to try and hold as little Turkish lira as possible. So the bulk of our cash reserves we keep in pounds or in US dollars. And it's also important to recognize that the exchange loss shown in the accounts is an accounting adjustment that occurs between periods. So it's, in a sense, it's not a real number. Michael, do you want, as I'm not the accountant, would you like to explain that in further detail?
Well, yes, the bulk of it relates to our holding in Zenith, and it is directly linked to, as you correctly said, the change in the Turkish lira pound exchange rate. It is a book entry booked against the carrying value of the assets, which are assets, not cash. So the cash we have invested mostly in US dollars, so that isn't depreciating. And it is a book entry, so it doesn't represent a cash loss to the business. The asset is still there. That is in detail in the accounts if anyone wants to know more.
Thank you. Okay. Michael, should we just jump back to some of the live questions?
I think we should.
While we're at it.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's one from Paul R. Are we investing in something more near-term, as most long-term Ariana shareholders don't have another 15 years to wait? Well, neither do I, but yes, certainly some of the targeted investments are near-term, as in 3 to 5 years. Very much what we achieved on lithium, which was 3 or so years, wasn't it, Kerem?
That's right. It was certainly less than 3 years. We'd turn that around.
And that would be pretty much under the Asgard portfolio, whereas some of the other true exploration generative targets will take longer.
Yes.
But they won't necessarily go through the long run of mine development. They may well be divested of when they are at peak value and joint ventured or unsold. Yeah,
I agree. I think that our investments in the lithium space back in 2014-15, they were timed beautifully. We picked up very early stage projects, and we were very quickly able to turn those around to creating real value for the business with appropriate early stage exploration work, and that's something that I think we do very well as a business. So why not do more of it? I mean, that's basically what that part of the strategy boils down to. And the other thing, of course, is that it relies on our experience operating in Turkey, where again we identified a relatively early stage exploration opportunity in the form of Kızıltepe, that had some initial drilling undertaken on it by Newmont at the time, but we could see that it had potential. It looked like the sort of thing that could become a mine, and it was just a matter of sequentially de-risking that asset and getting that to the point of mining commencing. So I think we're just quite good at identifying projects that have the ability to be turned into mines. So we just want to do more of that, basically. So let's go on to start at the bottom of the list. So we've got a question from Nida I. Joint venture, how is Ariana ensured that it will not be squeezed out on operational levels? So the Zenith joint venture, we had a very successful joint venture running with Procia Construction. And when we entered negotiations with Özaltın jointly with Procia, it was very clear that Özaltın wanted Procia to remain the operator of the joint venture, primarily because Özaltın themselves didn't have a mining division. They had no prior experience in the mining space, although it was an area obviously they were very excited to get involved in. And Özaltın primarily being a very large construction firm with large-scale engineering projects, primarily in hydroelectric dams, road infrastructure across country and elsewhere within the region. So they had all the engineering capabilities, but not specifically in the mining area, and certainly not from an exploration point of view. And the new joint venture framework essentially builds on the prior joint venture framework, which is already a very successful formula. So, you know, we're not expecting to be squeezed out of the joint venture.
Well, it is also protected under legal agreements that are properly constructed.
Correct. Yeah.
That's the basis of the primary arrangements.
Yes. There's a question about further ounces being discovered. Sullenbush has given us the example. How would it be monetized by Ariana? Well, now that Sullenbush is part of the joint venture, you know, any resource additions associated with existing parts of the joint venture, you know, that's a joint venture enterprise. It's not specifically an Ariana enterprise, although our exploration team provides input into the exploration of all the projects. However, if we identify another project that currently sits outside of the joint venture, we can sell that joint venture. So we can sell that project into the joint venture effectively at 3 times the exploration cost, which is very similar to the arrangement that we had in the previous joint venture with Procia. So that's effectively how we'd sort of monetize peripheral assets like that. Michael, do you have any that?
Nothing that sticks out.
Okay, there's a question here from Craig M. Can you please explain broad brush how 50% of the proceeds of the JV disposal stake results in 0.7 dividend, and what your logic is in spreading out the dividend over 3 tranches, and why you believe spreading out the dividend rewards long-term shareholders rather than a one-off payment? Can you confirm the disposal proceeds have been received in full? So the last question there is yes, we can confirm that $35.75 million has been received. It was received several months ago. There is the sale of satellite projects that was referred to in an announcement late last year. The sale of satellite projects for that $2 million in addition, that process through the mines department only recently concluded. And as a result of that, we've only received the first payment effectively for those satellite projects, but there will be monthly payments hereafter as per the terms of the arrangement that we had. So in going back to the rest of that question, so I've just lost the question now.
They have moved.
Yeah, the question just moved, was it?
I've just moved it. I'll just put it back up there for you, Kieran. Apologies. Yeah, you just answered it. So I just put it back up for you.
Yeah. Okay. The rest of the question related to the payment of the dividend in tranches. Well, there's very good reason for this. You know, we don't do anything lightly, that's for sure. You know, it's very logically thought out. There are significant tax advantages available to the company in Turkey in relation to the disposal of an asset. So we are taking advantage of those tax incentives. To do it any other way, we would not be getting those tax advantages. And of course, that wouldn't then be in shareholders' interests. So this is the right method by which we pay out the special dividend. And to do it over 3 tranches does reward long-term shareholders, and it certainly rewards loyalty of those shareholders, because we want you here for the long term. So I think there were a couple of other questions actually that related to the dividend payment. Just seeing if there's any other aspects of that need to be addressed. Michael, can you see any?
Well, there's one that I think is relevant. Neda, is the dividend payment in the joint venture agreement sanctioned in any way? How? Are releasing cash and information from the joint venture to AAU decided by a simple majority? If not so, how?
Okay, so this relates to the payment of dividends from the joint venture entity Zenith.
Yes.
So every March, we hold an annual general meeting in Turkey. And at that annual general meeting, we determine the profit from the prior year and whether the joint venture entity is going to pay out dividends associated with that. When we had the joint venture running with just Procia, that would happen every March, and we pay out interim dividends or repayment of loans, intercompany loans. And that was done right up until the end of 2020. The March AGM this year, because it happened just within a couple of weeks after the conclusion of the joint venture with Özaltın, we decided collectively to not declare a dividend for this March. But profits, of course, are being registered. We have profits from the joint venture entity. So we'll probably hold another meeting later this year in relation to the payment of further dividends from Zenith. And, you know, the payment of those dividends is proportionate to our investment share in the joint venture. And one of the key drivers for the joint venture, of course, is profit. This is why Özaltın is in business. That's why Procia is in business, and that's why we're in business. We want to ensure that we maximize profits from the operating company, and specifically from the operating mine at Kızıltepe, and indeed future mines.
Kerem, another one. Ryan, what do you view as the greatest opportunity for the company moving forward? I would say it's our adoption of technology and moving quickly.
Yes, I agree with that. And really building on the platform of the previous 15, 16, 17 years. You know, we've always been a very early adopter of the latest technology. So when we started as a business, we were utilizing remote sensing data sets that, you know, that had been used by other companies, of course, but we used them in slightly different ways. We were very successful in identifying a number of very prospective areas very early on in our exploration in Turkey. And in fact, we'd identified the Kızıltepe area and the region around it as being a high priority long before we identified the Kızıltepe opportunity, and prior to us negotiating with Newmont to secure that asset. Likewise, in the Salınbaş area, in fact, would you believe it, we actually picked out the Hot Maden discovery, and we actually wanted to acquire those licenses, but we couldn't at the time. And then it was a couple of years later that we then secured the Ardala copper gold porphyry. And of course, that became the basis for our original joint venture with European Goldfields, latterly Eldorado Gold. And then we made the discovery of the Salınbaş gold silver system sitting off just to the west of Ardala. So we've utilised technology very effectively previously, and we continue to do so as we've run through during the course of the presentation today. So there's a huge amount of leverage there, and we just know how to do things very effectively.
Neda, why separate the investment fund from ARIANA? Why not do it directly inside ARIANA?
Well, I think it needs its own entity because it's essentially undertaking a different type of business to ARIANA itself. So ARIANA in its own right is very much, if you're looking at the PLC, it's the group company. It's at the very top of that apex. What Asgard is doing is a component of that, but it has to be quite distinct. And we obviously had the Asgard entity that we established 6 odd years ago here in Australia. And that entity at that stage was very successful with its lithium strategy. And we're just utilizing that same entity rather than it just being a dormant part of our business.
Okay. John G, can't see how you've included the dividend element that you say needs voting on in this AGM. Shareholders have already given authority. Well, no,
it's not this AGM. The resolutions and special resolutions for this AGM are already outlined in the annual report. No, the authority we would then be seeking for the payment of the final dividend is on acceptance of the 2021 accounts, which would occur in 2022.
Yes, it is completely unrelated to the past year. It is this year in which the profits take place on that transaction. It's this year in which the dividend is distributed for the first and second tranche, and the third one being the final part.
Correct.
Mm-hmm.
Michael, Karim, we're just coming up to the hour mark. I don't know if there's any further questions you want to pick up. Of course, you can review all questions submitted by attendees today and publish responses where appropriate to do so. But just if there's anything further, or we can just ask you for a few further comments to wrap up before we redirect investors to give you some feedback.
Okay, thank you. I'll just answer just one more question then, because it just builds on the dividend question, and this one from Thomas D.
Mm-hmm.
His question is, I believe you previously mentioned an intention to pay regular dividends. Are they likely to commence directly after the 3 parts of the special dividend, or will there be a hiatus? So a very important question, this one, and one that an answer to which we've alluded to both in the annual report and in the announcement of today. We are working on a strategy to be able to develop sufficient capital reserves to pay a dividend in the longer term. But a large part of that is obviously dependent on the performance of our existing assets in Turkey through the joint venture, particularly Kızıltepe, and also in relation to that, the timing of commencement of mining of the Tavşan deposit as well, because that will be a critical part of that pathway going forward. But that's very much our desire. It is what we're working towards, and I think just watch this space.
Lastly, I'd like to just mention that as we have made it a potentially attendance AGM, i.e. there's nothing to stop people attending, given that nothing changes with regard to COVID attendance rules. In any event, I urge people to please vote by proxy, because that will ensure your vote is counted and everyone gets the opportunity to vote then at this AGM, 18th of August, London. Thank you all for attending.
Michael,
yes, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you to Investor Meets Company for hosting an excellent event.
Thank you both. Thank you for addressing those in questions from investors. And as I said earlier, of course, the company will review all questions submitted today and we'll publish those responses where appropriate to do so. Karim, just if there are any final words from you just before we redirect investors for feedback.
Just to say thank you very much for everyone in attending today. It's been a pleasure running through the latest developments of the company. As people can see, there's a lot to look forward to. We're certainly very excited about the next 10 years.
Yes, indeed.
That's fantastic. Michael, Dr. Krim, thank you indeed for updating investors today. Could I please ask investors not to close the session, as you'll be automatically redirected for the opportunity to provide your feedback in order that the management team can better understand your views and expectations. This will only take a few moments to complete and is greatly appreciated by the company. On behalf of the management team of ARIANA Resources PLC, we'd like to thank you for attending today's presentation. That concludes today's session. Thank you and good morning.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.